Welcome to While We Were Distracted, the podcast where we explore topics that often get overshadowed in the rush of daily life.
Imagine you're watching the head of counterterrorism for the entire United States, right? The guy whose literal job description is to see the threats coming before they actually hit us.
Right.
And he just walks out the door. In protest? During an act of war?
Which is already crazy on its own.
Exactly. But then, within hours of his resignation, his own government leaks to the press that he is actively under FBI investigation for stealing classified secrets.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is that this is the kind of bureaucratic warfare that usually stays buried for decades. I mean, we are watching it play out in real time.
Which is exactly why we are tearing into this today. Think of all those news alerts that have been blowing up your phone this week. We are looking at a massive stack of reporting today from NBC News, Axios, the New York Times, CNN, and a nearly 2-hour interview from the Tucker Carlson podcast.
It's a lot to sift through.
It really is. And the subject of all this is Joe Kent. He's the sudden ex-director of the National Counterterrorism Center, and we're looking at his explosive claims regarding the current war with Iran. But just a quick ground rule for you listening before we get into the weeds here.
Yeah, this is important.
Very important. The claims in these sources are highly, highly politically radioactive. I mean, they span the absolute extremes of left-wing and right-wing political spheres. So we aren't here to take a side. We aren't endorsing any of these viewpoints, and we certainly aren't, litigating the politics of it all.
Right. Our only mission here is to impartially report the facts, the timelines, and the ideas exactly as they're presented in the original source material.
Exactly. We just want to look at the mechanics of this breakdown because it reminds me of like a spectacularly messy corporate breakup.
Oh, totally.
Right. It's like a top executive calling a giant press conference to say, I'm quitting because the CEO's vision is morally bankrupt. And then, before he's even off the podium, the HR department is already whispering to reporters that, well, actually, he was about to be fired for embezzling.
That is the perfect analogy, except here. Instead of, corporate espionage, we're talking about the absolute highest levels of national security.
Yeah.
And to really understand the gravity of that HR leak, so to speak, you have to look at what the National Counterterrorism Center, the NCTC, actually is.
Right, because it's not just another random agency.
Exactly. It's not just another alphabet agency. It was created in the direct aftermath of 9/11, specifically to fix the communication failures that allowed those attacks to happen in the first place. It is designed to be the ultimate intelligence fusion center.
So they see everything.
Everything. The director of the NCTC is supposed to sit at the absolute nexus of the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, the military, looking at all the raw data to connect the dots.
So the person sitting in this chair is theoretically one of the most trusted individuals in the entire intelligence community.
They have to be, yeah.
And, when I was reading through the NBC piece, I fully expected this Joe Kent guy to be some political appointee, or maybe like a think tank academic. But his resume is incredibly heavy.
Oh, yeah. He's not an outsider.
No. He's a retired Green Beret. He's got a 20-year career in Army Special Forces with, get this, 11 combat deployments.
11. That's just, it's a massive amount of time downrange.
Right. And he worked at the CIA. Plus, he has this deeply tragic personal tie to the region. His wife, Shannon Kent, was a Navy cryptologist, and she was killed in a terrorist bombing in Syria back in 2019.
Yeah, so he is deeply, deeply embedded in the American military and intelligence apparatus. He understands the human cost of Middle Eastern conflicts intimately.
He's lived it.
Exactly. This isn't just a guy who wandered into the Pentagon. It's someone with undeniable insider credibility, which is what makes the administration's immediate attempt to brand him as a rogue, untrustworthy actor so jarring.
And the tuck line of how they branded him is where the math really just stops adding up for me. So let's look at the reporting. Kent officially resigns on Tuesday.
Right.
And almost immediately, administration officials start leaking that Kent was a, quote, known leaker. Semaphore breaks the story first, then Axios and NBC News confirm it. They say Kent has allegedly been under an active FBI investigation for months for mishandling classified intelligence.
Which is a huge accusation.
Huge. And the New York Times points out some crucial context here. They note that the DOJ and the FBI under President Trump have a pretty documented history of launching criminal probes into political critics, often without enough evidence to actually secure an indictment.
Yeah, the Times is clearly contextualizing this leak as a coordinated effort to neutralize a critic the moment he stepped out of line.
But okay, let's unpack this logically, because I was looking at the Axios reporting, and I just kept thinking, if the White House actually believed the director of the NCTC was a known leaker, and if the FBI had him under active investigation for months, why leave him in the job until Tuesday?
Right. It seems crazy.
How does that make sense? How does a suspected intelligence risk keep his keycard to the building that fuses all of our national security secrets?
Well, the short answer is they didn't leave him with full access.
Oh, really?
Yeah. CNN reported that Kent was previously, quote, sidelined from participating in the president's intelligence briefings, specifically those related to Iran.
Wait, how do you sideline the guy in charge of connecting the dots? I mean, do they just stop sending him calendar invites?
Honestly. Essentially, yes.
You're kidding?
No. In the intelligence community, access is dictated by something called compartmentalization. Even if you have top-secret clearance, you only get to see what you have a need to know.
Ah, okay.
So what the White House can do, and what they apparently did here, is simply freeze him out of the Presidential Daily Briefing, the PDB. They just don't invite him to the National Security Council meetings where the granular, highly classified strike plans for Iran are being discussed.
So they quarantined him?
Exactly. They quarantined him from the highest level conversations without actually formally firing him.
So they put him in the corner, but they kept him on the payroll.
Yeah, and it reveals a lot about how leverage functions in Washington. I mean, if he was a genuine, immediate threat to national security, his clearance would be pulled instantly, escorted out of the building.
Right.
The fact that the investigation was kept quiet for months, only to be weaponized the very same day he publicly broke ranks, suggests the probe was being held as collateral.
Wow. And what triggered that break in loyalty wasn't just him feeling ignored, right? It was a fundamental dispute over the intelligence that actually launched this current war with Iran.
That's the core of the issue. The administration's official stance, delivered by Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt, is pretty unequivocal. She stated that President Trump had strong and compelling evidence that Iran was preparing to attack the United States first.
And that's the legal justification.
Exactly. That imminent threat is the legal and strategic justification for the conflict.
But then Kent goes on Tucker Carlson's podcast on Wednesday for an hour and 40 minutes, and he flat out says that is fiction.
Completely denies it.
Yeah, he claims there was absolutely zero intelligence of a looming catastrophic attack. He specifically used 9/11 and Pearl Harbor as examples, saying there was no evidence of a big sneak attack in the works.
And the gap between compelling evidence and zero intelligence really comes down to how you define an imminent threat.
Right.
Kent pointed to the logic used by Secretary of State Marco Rubio during these internal debates. According to Kent, Rubio argued that Iran was an imminent threat to the U.S. because the United States believed Israel was preparing to attack Iran. And logically, Iran would inevitably strike back at both Israel and American assets in the region.
Okay, hang on. Walk me through that logic one more time, because I had to read that part of the CNN report twice.
Sure.
The U.S. knows Israel is going to attack Iran?
Yes.
So we have to preemptively attack Iran because Iran might defend itself. I mean, it's like, okay, say my neighbor has a dog, and I decide that dog is an imminent threat to my safety, but only because I know my other neighbor is actively planning to throw a rock at it.
That's a great way to put it.
So who is actually instigating the danger there?
Well, Kent concluded that based on Rubio's own framework, the imminent threat drawing the U.S. into war wasn't actually Iran. The threat was Israel's planned actions. Wow. And Kent takes this even further by discussing the late Iranian Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei, who was killed last month in joint U.S. and Israeli strikes.
Right, which was the strike that really escalated everything.
Exactly. And Kent surprisingly argued on the podcast that Khamenei, despite being the head of a hostile regime, was actually a moderating force on Iran's nuclear program.
Wait, a moderating force?
That's what he claimed.
Yeah.
He said Khamenei was the one holding the hardliners back from developing a weapon, and that assassinating him won't topple the regime. He says it will just cause the Iranian populace to rally around the military.
But that completely undercuts the administration's core premise that taking out Khamenei made the world safer.
It does. It fundamentally opposes it.
Yeah.
Kent told Tucker Carlson that before the U.S. bombed Iranian nuclear sites last year, the administration allowed for a, quote, robust debate. There were dissenting voices offering a sanity check.
Right.
But this time around, in the lead-up to this new war, he claims those doors were locked. The bureaucratic process where intelligence is vetted, challenged, and stress-tested was completely bypassed by the political leadership.
So since he couldn't get his dissenting voice heard inside the room, he put it in a resignation letter and essentially threw it like a grenade on his way out.
That's exactly what he did.
And this wasn't a polite disagreement over, troop deployments. He explicitly blames Israel and what he calls its powerful American lobby for tricking President Trump into this war.
The language he used was incredibly stark.
Yeah, he demands that Trump bar Israel from striking Iran and even demands the U.S. cut off defense systems to Israel if they don't comply.
And the reaction from the Republican establishment to that specific language was thermonuclear.
Oh, I bet.
Former Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell publicly condemned the letter as virulent anti-Semitism, stating flatly that isolationists and anti-Semites have no place in government.
Even his direct superior pushed back, right? Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard.
She did, yeah.
Though there's a really interesting detail in the NBC reporting about her. During a congressional hearing on Wednesday, Gabbard was asked directly if she believed Iran's nuclear program presented an imminent threat, and she actually dodged the question.
That's a very telling detail.
Right. She defended the president's authority to make the call, but she wouldn't validate the intelligence herself.
Which subtly reinforces Kent's claim that the intelligence community might not be fully aligned with the White House's definition of the threat. But, President Trump didn't mince words. He publicly reduced Kent, saying it's a good thing that he's out.
So here is the massive ideological contradiction I keep tripping over with this guy.
Okay, let's hear it.
Kent is sitting across from Tucker Carlson, pitching himself as the ultimate anti-war voice. He is resigning on moral grounds to stop American soldiers from dying in a foreign conflict.
Right.
But in that exact same interview, and the Times points this out, he effusively praises President Trump for assassinating General Soleimani back in 2020.
Yes, he does.
And he praises him for bombing Iran's nuclear facilities last year. So how does someone claim to be fundamentally anti-war but actively cheer for previous acts of extreme military aggression?
Well, because applying the label of anti-war pacifist to Joe Kent is a complete misdiagnosis of his ideology.
Really?
Yeah. His stance is rooted in a very specific modern right-wing isolationist worldview.
Okay, unpack that for me.
A traditional anti-war advocate opposes military intervention as a principle, right? They don't want violence.
Sure.
Kent doesn't object to the United States using overwhelming violent force. What he vehemently opposes is the entanglement of U.S. military might with what he perceives as foreign influence.
Oh, so it's not the violence he hates, it's the idea of America acting on someone else's behalf.
Precisely. In his view, American blood and treasure are currently being spent to serve Israel's geopolitical interests, not America's. He supports unilateral American aggression acting alone, for American interests alone, but he rebels the second he believes an ally is holding the leash.
Wow. But that hyper-focus on foreign influence doesn't stop at the Middle East, though.
No, it definitely doesn't.
When you look at the rest of his Tucker Carlson interview, that same suspicion completely bleeds into how he views domestic politics and the very agencies he was supposed to be running. The reporting from the Times and CNN reveals a staggering level of paranoia coming from inside his own office.
Yeah, the interview veered far beyond foreign policy into some deeply controversial conspiracy theories.
Yeah, both the NYT and CNN highlight that this isn't necessarily new for him. He has previously dismissed the Russia investigation as a hoax, and he has pushed totally unfounded claims that FBI agents orchestrated the January 6th attack on the Capitol.
Right, he's had these views for a while.
But on the podcast this week, they introduced new claims. They promoted the idea that Israel may have been involved in a 2024 assassination attempt on Donald Trump, and they suggested foul play involving Israel in the death of right-wing commentator Charlie Kirk last year.
And Kent didn't just discuss the Charlie Kirk theory on a podcast.
Wait, there's more.
Oh, yeah. CNN reported that last year, while serving as the director of the NCTC, Kent actively tried to use FBI systems to investigate foreign ties to Charlie Kirk's death.
Are you serious? How does the head of counterterrorism even go about doing that? Does he just, log into an FBI portal from his laptop?
Well, because the NCTC is a fusion center, the director has terminal access to highly classified interagency databases, systems like JWICS or SAPRNet, where raw intelligence from the FBI, NSA, and CIA is stored.
Okay.
He apparently used his access to run queries or direct personnel to investigate right-wing domestic figures, which completely crosses the legal lanes of his agency.
I mean, that sounds highly illegal.
It drew a direct, severe rebuke from FBI Director Kash Patel and DOJ officials. They essentially had to tell him to back out of their systems.
So he is treating the domestic intelligence apparatus like his own private investigative firm.
Basically, yeah.
And then Carlson presses him on the JFK assassination files, of all things. Kent admits there might not be anything earth-shattering in them, but he claims that the system, meaning the intelligence community he is a high-ranking member of, doesn't want the public getting used to rapid declassification.
Right. He views the bureaucracy as an entity that actively hoards truth to protect itself.
It's like finding out the chief of the city fire department secretly believes the water supply is a mind control hoax engineered by the mayor.
That's spot on.
The level of distrust coming from the person holding the hose is just terrifying.
Which brings us to the ultimate paradox of Joe Kent's exit. If we connect this to the bigger picture, look at the narrative he built on that podcast. He is the rogue truth teller. His voice was squashed, dissenting opinions were locked out, and the bureaucratic system silenced him.
Right, he's a martyr to the deep state.
But look at the reality of how he actually left.
Yeah.
CNN reports that on Monday, he didn't just quietly email his resignation to HR. He had a face-to-face meeting with Vice President J.D. Vance to hand it in and explain his concerns.
Wait, really? Face-to-face?
Face-to-face. Furthermore, Kent stated on the podcast that he spoke directly with President Trump before leaving.
You've got to be kidding me.
Nope. He described the president as very respectful and very kind, claiming they parted personally on good terms. He even mentioned he thinks the president is listening and knows things aren't going well.
So wait, let me get this straight. He is entirely alienated by the institutions of government, the intel community, the DOJ, the cabinet. But he has a direct, friendly hotline to the vice president and the commander-in-chief.
Exactly. It perfectly illustrates the fractured reality of the current administration. You have the official bureaucracy trying to run the machinery of government, and then you have the political leadership operating on personal relationships and media narratives. Kent felt totally isolated by the system, yet perfectly comfortable with the men leading it.
That is just wild. And, if you're listening to this, you might be wondering why this bureaucratic infighting matters to your daily life.
It matters a lot.
It does. Usually when you read a headline or see a press briefing about a missile strike or a troop deployment, it is presented to you as a polished, inevitable, highly logical decision. It looks like a unified front based on cold, hard math.
Right, a clean process.
But peeling back the layers on Joe Kent's exit shows you how incredibly messy, subjective, and personality-driven the intelligence behind those life-and-death decisions actually is. It's driven by massive egos, conflicting worldviews, interagency warfare, and deeply held personal grievances.
Yeah, and I keep coming back to his comment about the JFK files and his fundamental belief that the system doesn't want the public to have transparency.
Right.
I want you to really mull that over after this deep dive ends.
Yeah.
What happens to the fundamental stability of a nation when the ultimate insiders, the people sitting at the absolute pinnacle of the intelligence and counterterrorism apparatus, view their own intelligence gathering systems as an enemy?
Scary thought.
How does a country successfully navigate a major conference war when the warning call is coming from inside the house? And the house doesn't even trust itself.
When the fire chief doesn't believe in the water supply, the whole city is in danger of burning down. We're going to leave it right there for today. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us, and we will catch you on the next one.
Thanks for listening.
Don't forget to like and subscribe for the next episode on While We Were Distracted.